Hello and welcome to Storytime with Uncle Gravy. Big hellos to Isaac and Theo and Joseph, who I believe is working on a little side project, which is very exciting. I'm glad this story is inspiring you, Joseph, so carry on and don't rush. That's the only advice I give you, don't rush. We're going to pick up from the end of chapter 13 because there was a little bit of conversation that happened at the end of chapter 13, which is very, very important in this story. Because at the moment we've got Ash, we've got Bernie, we've got Chris, we've got the A and the B and the C, and they've just received a little hint, or Ash has, that maybe there might be someone or something else out there. Well, that is funny then, said the little hedgehog. We move around quite a big area each night, and we often hear someone who talks like, well, just like you. The words match at the end of what they say, and the words kind of bounce along. We thought it must be you. I suppose it isn't. Ash knew it wasn't. Ash also knew that Bernie and Chris didn't speak that way. It came naturally to Ash, but now, if the hedgehogs were right, could there actually be another Rustle out there? Ash went over what Tilda had said again. We thought it must be you. I suppose it isn't. And those last few words had just changed everything. When did you hear it last? Where were you going? Can it be true? Is my family growing? Is there a Rustle out there to make four? Or maybe, could there just be so many more? I need to get down, Tilda, stand on the ground, slide down and decide how this voice can be found. I need to think over what you have just said, but right now, you need to go home to your bed. Can we meet again in this part of the land? I need to know more, but I'm too shocked to stand. Tilda crouched down as low as she could, and Ash slid off, landing with a soft bump on the ground. Ash now couldn't help but think of Bernie's confession about hearing a voice in dreams that sounded like Ash but wasn't. Had Bernie actually been hearing another Rustle all along? How could that even be possible? It was almost too much information to take in all at once. We must go home now, Ash, said Tilda, but we're sure to be somewhere in the garden in the next few nights. We will help you if we can, if our mum doesn't notice you again. Ash replied with a quiet nod to say thank you and watched the three little hoglets shuffle away into the plants and along the grass. The whole process of meeting them had only taken a few minutes, but in that time everything that Ash believed or hadn't ever really even needed to question had been flipped upside down. Without thinking now, and in a bit of a confused blur to be honest, Ash headed back to the Sandy Shell Hotel, chose a new room and lay down for a nap. Dozing off happened surprisingly quickly, but the nap was a long and deep one which contained a lot of dreams and images of Bernie and Chris popping up too, as the nighttime garden world carried on all around. The next day saw the hot sunshine pause, and it was replaced with a drizzle and a cool breeze. The Russells liked days like these, as it made napping a lot more comfortable, and they knew there would be plenty of pools of fresh water to be found when they came out in the evening. They rarely got cold because of their furry bodies, and everything seemed to smell nicer too after the rain had washed things clean. Bernie and Chris had been spending more time together since Ash disappeared. It hadn't been something that they had talked about or actually decided, but they both just felt better with the company of someone else. Chris was still trying to understand how Ash had simply vanished, but Bernie was more concerned with the everyday jobs now, having realised that putting energy into something that couldn't be affected felt like a waste of that energy. The nighttime moon, which was growing again in size, was muffled and murky that evening as clouds continued to drift along in the sky, pushed along by a fresh wind coming up from a new direction. There were no stars to be seen, so as Bernie and Chris met up by the pond, the garden world around them was a very still and a very dark place. You know, it's weird, Chris, said Bernie, but these dark, dark nights make me think about Ash even more. There was always something nice about hearing the way Ash spoke that made things feel a bit lighter. I know exactly what you mean, agreed Chris, which is why I think we should have a long walk and look at places that maybe we haven't looked at for a long time. I don't know if it will help, and I don't know what difference it can make, but I want to feel as though I'm doing something different. Sometimes that can be a good enough thing to do on its own. Bernie looked at Chris for a moment and thought that this was something that would never have been said or done when Ash was still around. Chris liked to act on solid information, to do and act on what needed doing, rather than take risks and explore or be spontaneous. Chris, my friend, that is a fine idea. I will be a happy explorer with you tonight. Let's head off past Ash's sunflower and see what we can find. Chris could feel the warmth in Bernie's voice. A smile and a nod back to Bernie said all that was needed, and they set off from the pond's edge in the direction of the big fence which ran up to the top of the garden. The last time that Chris had dared to travel up to the top of the garden, it had been towards the patio area, where exciting news had been heard about hedgehogs and campouts and other interesting sounding things. That news had been shared with Bernie and Ash soon after, but the campout had ultimately brought bad luck to their end of the land. Chris hoped that travelling up this other, less explored side of the garden might bring better luck. Chris really hoped too that it might give some clues or help, and hoped that Bernie might hear something or see something. And Bernie just hoped. Ash's sunflower had been planted near to the fence and had now grown very tall indeed. Most things were very tall indeed for a Rustle, but the thin green stalk was now getting thicker and rougher, and they had to look up with their heads instead of their eyes to see all the way to the top. Chris and Bernie both patted the stem without thinking as they shuffled past it. Bernie thought it was amazing how much new life could be hidden inside a tiny seed, and new plants were always a smiley thing to see. A little care and time could go a long way, and often could make big things happen just from the smallest of beginnings. "Take care here, Bernie," whispered Chris. "The purry fluff thing found me over here the other day. It's close to its secret grass bed where it naps in the daytime, and it wasn't very happy to see me." "Okay," replied Bernie. "I'll stay really close to the tall wood wall, although it is pretty mucky here, isn't it?" Bernie was right. The drizzle in the morning had turned to rain in the afternoon, and with the ground being so dry for so long, lots of water had just run down the sides of the garden, and had then begun to soak in and make things sticky. As they walked on, though, the ground became drier, and they flicked the muddy bits from their feet and strode on towards their unknown target. When you're the size of a Rustle, travelling more than 20 feet in any direction is really rather a long walk, and it took quite a while for Bernie and Chris to get more than halfway up the side of the garden. What they found, as they entered the area that Holly's parents actually planned and grew things in, was that the going was getting a lot more difficult. There was a row of large planters up against the fence, holding bamboo plants which soared upwards, seemingly forever. Old log roll bordering, which had gone out of fashion and then rotted away, was the next challenge, and it felt as though their efforts were getting harder and not being rewarded with anything other than tiredness and a shrinking of the hope that they had carried when they set out. They were determined, however, and although these obstacles were very hard to get around and time-consuming to navigate, they eventually got to a clear patch of fence with a gravel path running alongside it. This was a busy place to find, with woodlice ambling along, tiny spiders scurrying, and slugs oozing their way towards their next juicy and precious plant. It was interesting for Bernie, who looked round at Chris with a smile, but now found Chris looking forward with a frown. The mood had changed, and Chris wasn't smiling. "This hasn't worked. This was a very hopeful idea, but a silly one. We have come all this way, but have only got muddy and tired. I haven't seen anything or heard anything that I wasn't expecting. There is no point going any further." Bernie was shocked to hear Chris talk like this. There was usually a plan, an idea, or a suggestion. There was never a "just give up." As Bernie thought of what to say to lift Chris's spirits, Chris simply turned around and began to walk back down the way they had come, only looking back to call out, "I'm sorry, Bernie. This was my fault. Come on, we'll be back before daylight if we keep going this way now. Bernie was confused and crestfallen, but had no other option than to follow. Usually the Russells would walk or creep along a little way and then pause to look around for dangers or to get a feel for where they were. Now though, Chris just walked on, in the complete darkness, feeling along the fence and around the obstacles in the way. It seemed clear that getting back to the familiar part of the garden was now the only thing now being planned in Chris's head, and right there and then, while stumbling along to keep up, Bernie felt a growing amount of energy that wasn't usual. It was a sense of anger and annoyance, which would have been very new to Bernie, but felt as though it was now in charge and couldn't or wouldn't be ignored. "So, Chris, are you just going to curl up in a shell and give up?" asked Bernie, a lot more loudly than usual. "You're the one of us that has the plans, the ideas, remember? This isn't like you at all. I think you're wrong to stop trying and walk away." It's the middle of the night and everything was damp, muggy and jet black. However, there was a deeper silence now than had already been surrounding them. Bernie had never challenged Chris in this way, but truly felt that Chris was making the wrong decision and needed to be told. Chris was shocked at Bernie for almost shouting the words out and stopped, turned and took a deep breath. "I'm wrong, am I? Wrong to do what, exactly? To hope that we could find our friend? To try the last thing I could think of, however unlikely it felt at the start? To risk travelling to the unknown side of our land to spot any clue for where Ash went? To realise now that it's pointless and we'll never see Ash again? Well, I shan't say I'm sorry. I'm only sorry that I told you what my plan was and you slowed me down while I was worrying about you too." There was now another very long silence. No words would come into Bernie's head, which now just felt like a jumble of feelings and confused thoughts. Chris and Bernie knew that they were facing each other, but it was so dark that this, the most difficult chat they had ever had, was happening without seeing each other's eyes, and that made it all so much harder. The sudden noise of a fox calling out broke the invisible stare, and Bernie was still unsure what to say, but was determined that the night wouldn't be wasted, even if Chris couldn't direct it any more. "The only thing I am sorry for, Chris, is that you feel this way. I am your friend, but I am still Ash's friend, and I am not giving up tonight. When we get back to where we started tonight, you can nap if you want to, but I will carry on exploring. Who knows, maybe I could be the one that shares something with you that you don't know yet. That will be a new experience for you, won't it?" Although Bernie spoke the words calmly and in an almost friendly way, they could have been shouted too, and Bernie had nearly done just that. Either way, it felt good to have said them, however they had come out. Chris was, for the first time in a very long time, lost for words, so just turned and carried on walking. It took another long trudge and a weave to get back to the pond area, but once they got there, it was clear that Chris's mood had not changed. A quick turn around and a "good luck" was mumbled before Chris headed for an area where the shelter was available to crawl into. If anything, Chris's tired and defeated actions just made Bernie feel stronger and more determined to carry on, and it was this new emotion, which we would probably call anger, that was about to make a very, very big difference. And there's the pause, which means we've reached the end of today's chapter. Quite a dramatic one today, but a good one about friendships and thinking and planning. And sometimes the things that we need to say or want to say but maybe feel scared to say, but it's always worth saying them, as long as you say them the right way. I hope you're all well. Thank you for watching today,